Nick Spencer gave us our hero back, and I can't thank him enough. Nick Spencer gave us our hero back. Gave us our hero back. Gave us our hero back. It's essentially saying that the weird direction the book has been going for 10 years is over. He's writing something that feels true to the character. Feels like the triumphant return of someone we lost a long time ago. Years ago, I made a video praising the initial 10 issues of Nick Spencer's Amazing Spider-Man run as a new beginning for the character. I felt great optimism that a lot of the problems the ASM comic had over the last decade prior would finally start to fade and the book could get back on track to where it was before, well, you know. I've read every issue of Amazing Spider-Man up until this run at least once, and throughout my formative years I felt very strongly that the book's best time was in the 70s and 80s. The stories were keeping me engaged with Peter's personal life, the plots were always building to something important, and something new was always happening to keep the book fresh. I loved my time with that comic back then, and I'd even start skimming past the fight scenes just to get back to that juicy personal life drama that Spider-Man is known for. With the beginning of Nick Spencer's time as the lead writer on the book, I felt we were getting back to that golden age again, and perhaps we'd see some progression that the character has been sorely lacking in the 21st century. But as the run continued into a downward spiral of baffling decisions and visible editorial meddling, and subsequent runs after it fell victim to many of the same problems, it became clear to me that unless something drastically changes behind the scenes at Marvel Comics, the Amazing Spider-Man book can never truly be redeemed. The Spencer run had a solid start by bringing the, at the time, messy status quo for the character back to something resembling more of where he was in the 90s. Peter was roommates with the tragically underutilized Rand Robertson again. Peter and MJ were finally dating again, which gave us hope for one more day finally getting proper acknowledgement. Peter and Felicia were finally on good terms again as platonic superhero friends, and Peter was having to deal with the consequences of some of the events from Slott's run. I felt at the time that Spencer's Spider-Man books were making an attempt to address criticisms of the book from Dan Slott's historic run on the character, and Dan himself actually replied to the video to offer some of his counterpoints. This was a moment of growth for me because of a few reasons. It made me realize that A, character writing like this is still incredibly subjective, and both of us could make an argument about what counts for being in character for Spider-Man, and both of us could be right from a certain perspective. It taught me to treat my own opinions about handling of characters as less matter of fact, and there's a lot of different angles to look at these subjects from, and that there isn't always a clear, correct answer. I actually agreed with a few of Dan's points here in this thread, but the other bigger thing it taught me is that B, the creators I talk about are real people. They're not far-off magical celebrities that exist on a different plane of reality like fictional characters. They can and probably will see the things that we say about them that can have a personal effect on them. I'd probably be as defensive as Dan Slott is on social media too if I was always getting the angry, accusatory bile and hatred he was getting from fans that were all either angry 15-year-olds like I was, or angry alt-right wackos in their 40s that can't accept social commentary as inherent to most, if not all, forms of storytelling. And I realized I don't want to be in either group. I don't want to be an edgy teenager slinging mud and treating creatives like they're bad people for not writing the ship that I like in my fiction. I also definitely don't want to be the type of guy that says things are woke if they have even the slightest hint of social awareness or characters that represent the diverse world we live in.
Finally!
It seems like I've become a lot softer in recent years. It's because I don't enjoy being angry and bitter. I don't revel in relentlessly trashing things like we all did when we were younger. It's not fun to be pissed off. I try to be fair and I try to look for the good in things, and I'm still honest when I can't see the good, but I don't have to be completely reactionary and rageful. And for all these lessons, I want to thank Dan for reaching out and offering an opposite end of what I thought was a one-sided conversation. I thought I was just gonna just talk my shit and no one would ever be able to hear it or respond to it or care, but he's a person like me. I don't magically love a lot of his Spider-Man storytelling now after this, but I've made great strides to understand it and realize he's just a guy who loves this character like me. So I can't speak for the toxic fandom, but I can speak for myself. And I do want to extend an apology toward Dan for the way I villainized him when I was a kid for no reason other than a difference of opinion about a silly comic book hero. I've grown up and I've learned. And I'm sorry. Also, Dan never said this quote. That was poor editing on my part. I was trying to use it as a simplified visual filler to explain my feelings on the decisions Marvel tends to make with their popular characters. But if he actually said it, I would have attributed that quote to him, which I didn't, so please stop mistaking this for a real thing that he said, because it's not. I don't know who said it. Someone must have, because I heard it like 100 times and I thought it made sense to use, but I don't know who said this. So with all that being said, how did the rest of the Spencer run go? Did it meet my expectations? Well, I assumed because of the strong start that it would eventually stop focusing so much on addressing criticisms of ASM and start finding its own voice and identity. I was expecting it to start progressing the character forward again in new ways. But the unfortunate reality is that Spencer's Spider-Man books never made it past his first phase of going back to old storylines and trying to put a band-aid on their various blemishes or unpopular choices. I thought Spencer was only disavowing more recent decisions with the character, but he was just starting there and working his way back. Slott's run wasn't the only thing he wanted to go back and tinker with. It was, well, a little bit of everything. ASM in this time period had an unhealthy obsession with correcting mistakes of the past, rather than bringing anything new to the table. The book's frustratingly slow pacing was always building towards another storyline, attempting to dive back into a previous book and retcon or rewrite a previous writer's contribution. Okay, let's take a look at one of the bigger examples. A huge portion of the book was devoted to revisiting Kraven the Hunter and trying to undo his unfortunate resurrection in Grim Hunt that stole some of the impact of Kraven's Last Hunt. J.M. DeMatteis's Kraven's Last Hunt is one of the best Spider-Man stories ever told, and the tragically dark ending of Sergei Kravinoff taking his own life after a long battle with his mental illness and insecurities about losing to Spider-Man drove him over the edge. But decades later, Joe Kelly's Grim Hunt storyline has Kraven's surviving family members uniting and using a dark magical ritual to resurrect him, something even Kraven himself thought was unnecessary. Kraven was now immortal unless Spider-Man himself killed him, which we know would never happen. Now Kraven's Last Hunt feels like Friday the 13th, the final chapter. It's just a silly title because we know it became historically incorrect, and that ending loses some of its power when we know that. He'll be back. It's probably one of the most ill-advised character resurrections in the history of comics, which will become a theme in this video. Spencer's run tried to have its cake and eat it too. I think Spencer is fully aware of all the issues that the status quo creates for telling good stories in ongoing Cape comics. Nothing is permanent. Another writer will always want to use this or that character again later on down the line. Nothing can be definitively finite. But he made an attempt to work around this by having Kraven create a near-identical clone of himself that's just several years younger and still in his prime. The story sees Kraven attempting one last time to emotionally break Spider-Man so that he can finally break the curse. But Spider-Man's faith and optimism wins out in the end. So Kraven breaks the curse by becoming Spider-Man in essence and taking his own life once again. It's all very flowery and kind of dumb. He's been re-killed to bring us back to Last Hunt, but Spencer future-proofs the story by leaving behind Kraven's more powerful clone to take up the mantle and essentially be the new permanent Kraven for all other writers to use in the future. The story has a lasting effect, but will also allow the cycle of repetition to remain unbroken. The problem with all of this is that it's ultimately sort of pointless in fixing what was broken. The damage has been done. Resurrecting Kraven at all still harms Last Hunt retroactively, and laying him back to rest again can't undo that damage. The Kraven clone running around is still going to be a blemish on that original story by not leaving well enough alone. We devoted dozens of issues to building up this great Hunt storyline for it to ultimately end right where it started. There's still an alive and well Kraven the Hunter running around, and Grim Hunt still exists as part of the story. The effort is appreciated, but it's just unfortunately something that can't ever be fixed, making the effort fruitless. Remember when Spider-Man found the guy who framed his parents for being Red Skull's spies and allowed him to get blown up? No, he didn't. That guy's fine. Remember when Ned Leeds was framed for being the Hobgoblin and died? No, he didn't. He's actually fine. Gog is just a misunderstood little guy. The Tablet of Life and Death works completely differently, actually. Chameleon's origin story is completely different now. The Isotopic Genome Accelerator works differently, actually. Norman Osborn made a deal with Mephisto, and Mephisto owns Harry's soul. Retcons are a natural part of comic books and long-form serialized storytelling in general, and sometimes retcons can be good. But this is just too much all at once. It's like there's not a single new idea on display here, just riffing on older stuff in the worst possible way to improve it somehow. And this obsession with fixing the unfixable would soon characterize the entire rest of the Spencer's run, leading it to being arguably the worst run in the character's history.
Readers have asked me to fix older stories they don't like. Those aren't the stories I'm interested in telling. Stories about stories are never as good as just telling stories. We don't need serialized fiction to mend and paper over older stories. We need them to entertain.
You said it, brother. Wait, you said that?
Can we talk about Kindred? I'm dying to not talk about Kindred. I'd rather jump in a wood chipper than talk about Kindred, but let's talk about Kindred. For those who haven't read it, I'm going to get the basics out of the way for the relevant backstory. Harry Osborn went nuts and became the Green Goblin way back in the 80s and 90s with the intent of avenging his father's death. We know this one, it's a classic, arguably one of the best Spider-Man stories of all time. But Harry's heart gives out from the batch of goblin formula that gives him his powers. Flash forward, and habitual loser Mysterio fails to pull one over on Daredevil of all people and exits the server, rather than get taken to jail again. Then a few years later, Mysterio returns as like a weird demonic version of himself, and then they quickly forget that happened and he's just normal Mysterio again. Also, Peter Parker meets these two twins that think that he's their dad, and it turns out that they're actually Norman Osborn's kids who aged way too fast because goblin formula or something. And Gwen Stacy apparently cheated on Peter Parker with Norman Osborn, which is yuck. Shortly after that, Peter goofs up big time and trusts Tony Stark. Big mistake, and that results in his identity going public and all of his enemies going after him. Aunt May gets caught in the crossfire, and Peter makes a deal with a demon, Mephisto, to sell his marriage in order to save Aunt May's life. This results in some bizarre time travel stuff where history was permanently changed and the wedding never happened, and anytime he said the word wife, you just need to autocorrect that in your head to girlfriend, mister. That's the breaks. Naturally, the One More Day storyline is universally reviled because all of that is a stupid way to undo a marriage instead of just having the characters get a divorce like goddamn adults. It regressed Peter's character and just made him look really bad to do something that selfish to get the 347-year-old Aunt May like 3 more years maximum instead of just accepting reality. Part of growing up is that your family members get old and die. But this guy's not allowed to grow up, so Aunt May will be around forever. He can't be married because that makes him look too old to be the young superhero. He can't be a father because that makes him too old to be the young superhero. After all of that happens, Harry Osborn comes back because everyone with the Goblin Serum gets an extra free guy. Alright, so the stage is set. Kindred, a mysterious stranger from hell, shows up covered in giant centipedes for no reason, and he's got beef with Peter Parker over some terrible sin he committed that ruined everybody's lives. Mysterio met this guy while they were both dead and says Kindred was some damned soul that rose through the ranks of hell to become a really powerful demon. They're back on Earth now, and everything Mysterio has done over the last few years was part of some master plan that Kindred has had for ages. Meanwhile, Peter and MJ are having a hard time scheduling time to be together, and Peter reveals to us, the reader, that he has plans to propose to MJ. In the other book, Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, written by Tom Taylor around this time, Aunt May is diagnosed with cancer. See a pattern forming? All these pieces fit together. It's making sense. But then the problems arise. Peter and MJ get back together at the beginning of this run just to basically never be in the same room together. So much so that MJ got her own book about the stuff she was doing in LA. Peter's life outside of Spider-Man is becoming such a non-entity in this run that I don't know where he works or what his social life is like or how his school stuff is going. And weirdly, sometimes even he is barely in this book because it's so focused on the villains and everyone's giant evil plans for him. A lot of time devoted to making Boomerang like a cool character that's like redeemable. And it's just all terrible. I'm sorry, I hate it. Like, I really could not get into any of that. Peter Parker stops being a character in this run and just starts being, like, there. He's so reactionary. He just waits for something to happen and then reacts. But his character is so flat now. Kindred pops by to drop vague hints about his motivation every few issues across dozens and dozens of issues, and reading this in real time was massively frustrating because the answer is becoming more and more obvious, but we're still stalling for time. How many speeches do we have to read through before you finally say something actually relevant? Kindred talks about Peter with familiarity and calls him Pete because they were friends once. Kindred thinks Peter is a selfish bastard that hurts people he loves. Kindred has a fear of Norman Osborn. Kindred remembers this party from a way older issue of the book that Harry Osborn was at. Norman Osborn recognizes Kindred and is like, "Hey, I'm proud of you, Redacted." So much time wasted. Kindred finally reveals himself to be Harry Osborn, the real one, implying the guy who came back post One More Day is a clone or an imposter, which ruins so many Harry Osborn character building moments by just saying, oh, well, the clone did those. God, the clone fathered a child and got back together with Harry's ex-wife. Oh my god. Alright, I can deal with that. So, he kills Peter and shows him a vision of him waking up again at the end of One More Day. Like it's the exact same scene. We're back there again. Why did the inker forget to lower the black values for some of this? This looked really amateurish and shitty. This is not how a professional comic book should look. This is Harry's way of saying his return back then was just as wrong as it felt at the time, and he reveals himself as Kindred to Peter. Then he proceeds to torture and kill Peter hundreds and hundreds of times in different ways, bringing him back each time because he thinks he deserves that for what he did. Which, by the way, he still hasn't said what that is yet. I haven't even mentioned Sin Eater and the magic shotgun that makes you act nice yet. But I can't figure out where to even bring that up. This is such a clusterfuck already, and I haven't even gotten to the bad part. That's part of the revenge plan, I guess. Bring back Sin Eater and make him use a magic shotgun to make people nice again. So, part of the evil plan is to make Norman have a conscience with a magic wand so he feels bad whenever you go, hey, here's all those bad things you did. Doctor Strange is a guest character in the book and summons Mephisto to interrogate him about why Spider-Man's life is getting with so badly right now by people from hell. And then the book shuts down and things start getting weird. This scene stays in some odd form of stasis for 25 more issues. Like, neither character is allowed to leave the room or say anything that advances the story. Peter loses track of Harry and then has this big therapeutic monologue where it seems like Nick Spencer is talking directly to the reader about how stuck he feels. Peter is spinning his wheels, nothing's getting done, nothing makes sense anymore, he's feeling lost and hopeless. A lot of the resurrections are starting to get ridiculous. I feel like this is a turning point. The behind-the-scenes story for this book has been so vague and unclear, we have no idea what happened while writing this thing. But I think Spencer was trying to clue us in this issue. Again, everything I say about Nick Spencer, or what was going on, or any of the intent behind all of this is purely speculation on my part. There is no evidence to support any of it. It's just what I can interpret from the material. God, please save me. Please help me escape this. Please just set me on fire before I have to explain Kindred anymore. Okay, I guess he wants to hear this one too. Kindred is actually not Harry, but he is. Kindred is not one guy, but two. Or kind of three, somehow. They're Gabriel and Sarah Stacy. Gwen's kids with Norman that aged like 5 times faster than they were supposed to because of goblin formula reasons. At some point they died off-panel, and Mephisto made them his champions to try to break Peter's spirit. Also, they're not Gwen's kids because Mysterio implanted fake memories in Mary Jane and Norman Osborn via hypnosis at the behest of an AI with evil Harry's memories, even though that used to just be a pre-recorded message, but now it's alive, and evil AI Harry wanted to pull a prank on everybody by tricking everyone into thinking Norman had kids with Gwen, even though telling everyone about the prank at this point just ruins it, because it's a giant sigh of relief to find out it was fake and Gabe and Sarah are just more clones. When did Mysterio meet Kindred in hell? Gabe and Sarah died years after Mysterio was already brought back from the dead by Kindred. So it can't be them. Why is Harry a clone too? When and why did that even happen? The story doesn't even say. Why does Kindred remember the shit from before Gabe and Sarah were born? What about the note in Gwen's handwriting confirming that they were born? Was that a forgery? Did evil AI Harry scan her handwriting and then print a secret message that looks exactly the same? Why did they disguise themselves as Harry for so long? Why do they talk to Pete as if they're old friends? They don't even know him. None of this makes sense! My friend Dan Gvozden is practically a Spider-Man historian by this point, and he created a thread on Twitter trying to make sense of the retcons at play here. You can read it if you want, but all it's going to do is drive you insane because there's no real answers to any of this. Okay, so we're doing this again. We're doing this again. This is twice now. This is twice. Whose skeletons are these? Clone Harry, Demon Harry, and AI Computer Harry, and Skeleton Harry are 4 separate characters doing completely different things simultaneously, one of them being dead, and one of them gets turned into Gabe and Sarah at the last minute. And then Mephisto is like, Mayday Parker would beat me up if she's canon, and I can see the future, so that's why I did one more day. So you're probably wondering, with how weird and wobbly all this got, does Kindred actually tell us what Peter's big sin was? The thing that he or they were so mad at him for? The thing that makes Kindred think Peter deserves to die 1,000 deaths? Nope. He won't say it. He can't say it. What was the point of all this? Spending 3 straight years being led in circles just to undo sins past? I don't buy it. We were all happy ignoring sins past. The book stopped acknowledging it. Fans only brought it up in a joking, wasn't that weird way. None of us took that seriously. It was a joke. And it was all gone and forgotten. Now all that unpleasantness was brought back just to negate it with the worst retcon in the history of comics. When the fix is worse than what was broken in the first place, was it worth it? And what did we actually gain from all that? Gwen Stacy's memory is preserved once again, even though that character has been dead for half a century? Again, there is no clear answer on what happened behind the scenes, and I can merely speculate, but I think Nick Spencer's mission plan was to undo one more day, and then that got vetoed by the people he works for somewhere along the lines, maybe early, maybe later than you'd think. And you can literally watch the scramble to catch up in those last 20 issues to try to at least undo Sins Past as a compromise, so all the build-up could end up fixing something, anything. And the end result is a story so bloated, sluggishly told, full of pure nonsense and confusing, poorly executed ideas that I just can't do it anymore. I'm tired of being strung along for the big reveal to be pulled out of the writer's hands and turned into more garbage. I can't comment on what Spencer planned originally, but I can guarantee you it would have probably been better than this. I was happy with how this run started, but it ended up devolving into such a disaster that I can't keep investing my time and money into this series that confidently boasts storytelling on this level. This is completely ridiculous. I've heard people defend the Nick Spencer run by saying nobody appreciates the janitor, but Nick Spencer had to do all this, and I completely disagree. These solutions are creating more problems that someone else will have to come along and fix. This is the continuity equivalent to that gag where someone plugs a leak in a boat and then another one springs somewhere else and then they plug that one and it just keeps going. The ship has sunk, guys. My God. I've just hit my wall with Spider-Man as of this run. I think 70% of my life so far has been post One More Day stories, and there's always more teasing about undoing it. There's always hints that Mephisto is right around the corner. He's constantly showing up in other books messing with other Spider-Men. There's always more dangling MJ in front of the readers to get us interested again, like keys in front of a baby. Everything about this comic that sparked joy or excitement in me is gone. The Peter Parker home life drama has been replaced with constant clones and implanted memories and time or multi-dimensional travel. It feels like he's Spider-Man more often than he's not, which at this point feels like a crutch that these stories have put all their weight on. Peter and MJ being together is just a button that they press to keep the fandom interested when they're getting bored, and they have to press it more and more frequently lately. There's basically never any actual new villains or storylines, just more weird sludge made up of retconning older stuff or assassinating characters that editorial has a vendetta against for no reason. I'm tired of being disappointed over and over, thinking, hey, this will be the run that makes me like the book again, and then having it turn into a flaming wreck. I haven't really loved a Spider-Man story since, I want to say, New Ways to Die. Then Big Time came around, and I know that's a fan favorite, but I just couldn't get into it. Everything since then has been a slow descent into apathy for me. Now I just don't care. None of it matters. Peter Parker could die, I know he'll just get brought back. MJ could get killed off because there's a clear bias against her behind the scenes from the old heads that grew up reading Gwen stories. I don't care anymore. Will One More Day finally be undone? Probably not, but if it does, I don't give a shit anymore. I'm over the mystery box storytelling and constant Spider-Verse team-up events. 200 years from now, you and I will be long dead, but Peter Parker's stories will still be coming out with him in college for the billionth time, chasing some girl he's going to break up with eventually. The story has no permanence and no stakes. It's just repetitive, grueling dreck that's made to keep the book going indefinitely because the book makes too much money to ever be canceled no matter how bad it gets. There are certainly worse stories coming from the big two, but I think Amazing Spider-Man takes the cake by being so maddeningly mid to low quality for such long stretches at a time. It doesn't need to be good. It doesn't need to be interesting. It just needs to keep existing as an additional revenue stream. It's The Simpsons of comic books. Again, I owe a huge apology to Dan Slott because his run had a lot of the problems listed, but at least something new was always happening. Peter gets a new job or a new suit or fights a new villain or gets his brain swapped with Doc Ock or gets a forgettable sidekick, or everyone in New York gets spider powers or he becomes a billionaire. I mean, the status quo always snapped back on itself eventually, but at least we were deviating a little bit. I didn't always like what was going on, but he was coming up with things for the characters to actually do. I was at least interested to see what was happening next. It wasn't 74 straight issues of backtracking other stories or having the characters twiddling their thumbs waiting for something to happen. I was wrong about so much. Nick Spencer's Spider-Man run didn't bring Spider-Man back. It just made me realize why I'm so tired of Cape Comics in general by pushing so hard for something big and important just so the superiors could probably trash all of it. Why are we stuck like this? Why does the editorial staff at Marvel demand that the book continue on like this forever. Clashing generational ideologies. My childhood Peter Parker was married.
Where's my wife, you symbiote freak?
Their childhood Peter Parker was in his early 20s just trying to figure out his way in the world. But they're the ones in charge, not me. They have the authority to make their vision of him the one that sticks, and the one that stays. What I grew up with was a dream that we all woke up from and will never see again in this book. At least not until I'm in my 60s and someone my age is in charge at Marvel and the current guys have all had their time. No Goblin Serum 1-up for them, but then eventually someone younger who loves Emma Stone will come in and demand for Mary Jane to go back into oblivion again. Whoever the writer is at the time will get blamed for it, just like always. It's taken me 2 years to write this video, and 4 or 5 completely different drafts. Some very angry and from a place of hurt, some versions even more bitter and cynical than I'm probably coming across now. This time, I just want to go for sincerity when I tell you this is a very personal and difficult thing for me. But in a way, I feel like this helped me grow up a little, in like a harsh way. Like finding out the truth about Santa Claus or paying taxes for the first time and realizing that's the rest of your life. I finally realized that the things that have been eating away at my enjoyment of this series affect damn near every popular comic character out there, and it's not something that will go away. Lizard syndrome is the default now. Stories without endings just start to get stale after so many years of playing it safe or veering away from so many potential points of growth. I can keep invested in series like Ninja Turtles or Transformers or something, because, you know, those keep restarting and doing new things. It's old stories told with a new filter or through a new lens or with a new direction. Or sometimes just completely new stories that have nothing to do with what they did before. Spider-Man doesn't get those reboots. It is just doing what it's always been doing. But, like, not really interesting anymore. This isn't Dan's fault, or Nick Spencer's, or even Zeb Wells. They're merely a single component, a cog or an egg yolk perhaps, in a giant Rube Goldberg machine that was designed to kick me in the balls.
You're not gonna kick me in the nads again, are you?
No, I'm not, Beavis. Those days are over.
Oh, good. That's a relief. That is the best news I've heard all day. What's that thing?
They didn't build this machine. Other men did decades ago. I suspect even the writers at Marvel are aware of how this works. When someone asked Chip Zdarsky if he'd ever helm ASM after writing some of the best Spidey stories in the last decade for sister books, he basically said, "Why would I ever want to do that?"
And, you know, I've said it before that I don't really have an interest to write that because of the kind of the weird expectations and kind of everything that kind of surrounds it. And people think that's weird because I go off and do Batman, but I understand the audience of Batman better than I do the audience of Spider-Man.
After what happened to Dan, Nick, and now Zeb, it seems clear that writing that book is a huge honor, right up until you become the internet's collective punching bag for all the things you can't do. All the things they want, but you can't give them. Chip's got the right idea. It's like when Lex Luthor said,
Do you know how much power I'd have to give up to be president?
him and everyone else are better off writing the side books that get canceled every year or two. They have at least some leg room to tell decent stories in there. The name keeps changing, but the story stays the same. Whoever writes Amazing Spider-Man is the new public enemy #1 for the fandom until the next guy comes along, and it's not fair to keep picking on them for telling garbled stories while their hands are tied and every idea they have resembling growth or change is getting tossed out by their boss. They're the figurehead that gets all the flack, but at this point I think they're really only contributing dialogue. Which, I mean, shit, there's flaws there too. Sometimes a good idea or an interesting story accidentally leaks out of the machine's structure and we see a glimpse at something comforting like old times. But that will never be the default again while the current players are in charge at the highest level at Marvel. Spider-Man is Marvel's flagship character. This could go all the way beyond the editors of his books and straight to the tip top of the company for all we know. I'm not even going to say editorial could be the problem. This could be some executive, like an Ike Perlmutter type, that keeps demanding that, no, he has to be the young and relatable hero. I don't know who to blame, and at this point I'm tired of trying to figure it out. But I know someone is causing this. And while nothing ever changes anymore, I just can't get invested. All through the books I read in high school, the book was changing and growing. Peter's character was growing up alongside me. I knew his struggles because they were happening to me at the same time. It's part of what makes so many of us initially love the character. We get what he's going through. But now I feel alienated from that entire relatability aspect of the character. Sure, I love many characters that I don't find relatable at all, but it's sad that Peter Parker and I have drifted apart in that way. That element is completely gone for me. I'm married. I have a job. My wife and I want to have kids soon. I'm going to keep getting older and facing the challenges that come with that. While I do that, Peter Parker is going to be doing the same things he was doing 40 years ago. I'm outgrowing him. Maybe someday I'll look back and enjoy his stories again from the perspective of, I remember what that was like for me at that age, but right now I'm just not interested in that grind. The repetition is killing me, and the thought of picking up another issue of this makes me anxious. I can't do it anymore. I don't even want to pirate this book. I feel like reading it all is somehow still supporting it. So I have to just leave this book behind for now. I've fallen out of love with it, and I don't know when I'll find the passion for it again. My relationship with this comic, much like with the rest of the fandom, has become toxic. The stories for the foreseeable future will still be full of stuff that bores me or makes me angry, and I'll see everyone around me blaming the poor guy that's writing the book at the time and missing the entire point of why it's a problem, but they always come back for more. But I can't live like that. I don't hate watch movies I know will suck and I'll have a miserable time with. I don't seek out disappointment. And that's all there is in here at this point. So I have to say enough is enough. People will say, don't like it, don't read it. And they couldn't be more right. I haven't read an issue of Amazing Spider-Man in 2 years now. And in a way, it feels freeing. But it also felt very sad. Something that at one point in my life brought me so much joy is now something I feel a bitterness and depression towards. Something I really resent. Maybe one day we'll be on better terms again. I'll still enjoy the adaptations of his older stories coming out in animation, games, and movies. But the comic itself, I have to do what Peter Parker can't anymore. Move on. So anyway, everyone just go read Uncanny Spider-Man, because Nightcrawler is Spider-Man, and that's a cool idea. I like Nightcrawler. Hey, also, I always get mad at YouTube for not putting my videos in the subscription box because people will comment, "Finally, Xavier uploads again after all these years," not knowing 3 other videos came out within the last month already. So maybe that stupid bell icon thing will help you remember I exist. If you want other ways to support the channel, you can always go hit up that Patreon for early videos and exclusive stuff because it's just $1. I'm not kidding, it's only $1. Isn't that cool? If everyone who watched this video donated $1 a month, I'd be able to afford a house for myself, so that would be really cool. You can also check out our merch on TeePublic, or just buy some of my random stuff on eBay. I have a pretty substantial collection of old toys that are still in the box in perfect condition, so go take a look in case you find something you like. And lastly, since this is a YouTube video and you probably play Fortnite, drop my creator code XavierGM next time you buy a silly dance or a cool character skin. Really helps me out. See you next time.